Welcome to the first online dialogue of the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life at Georgetown University. We hope you've joined us. The old joke is when you're at a Catholic meeting, there are two things you can count on. There'll be no one in the front pew and the audio visuals never work. But we have lots of people working with us to make sure the tech works. And we've had a remarkable response. Our title is Catholic Social Thought and the Coronavirus Crisis, Moral Principles for Terrible Times. And at last count I saw, it was about 1,250 people had RSVP, which shows that there is a hunger for discussing the moral questions in the midst of really, really tough times. This won't be our last dialogue of this sort. We're already at work on one for the week of April 6th that will talk about the economic and moral dimensions of this crisis. I want to thank everybody for joining us via Facebook Live. Encourage you to share your thoughts on social media using hashtag CST, coronavirus, or at the initiative at GU Public Life on Twitter. You can submit questions to the panelists by emailing the questions to Catholic Social Thought at georgetown.edu. Some of you have already done that. And if you have any trouble with the technology or some other issue, contact Anna Misla at georgetown.edu, anna.misla@georgetown.edu. I want to thank the Georgetown Global Health Initiative for their help in promoting this. They're great partners. And I encourage you all to join the conversation on social media with the hashtag CST coronavirus and by tagging the initiative at CSTGU Public Life on Twitter. Today I posted an article on America Magazine on some of these questions. And what I tried to say, and I think what's in all our hearts, is this is a health crisis. It's obviously an economic challenge of enormous proportions, but in other ways, this is a moral test for us. The scale of suffering and death and tension and division and isolation is just overwhelming. And a test like this reveals who we are, what we believe, and what kind of society we're becoming. And when we look for how to respond, we look to our family, we look to those close to us, but we also look to our faith. And it's a certain irony that the traditions of our faith sort of turn us upside down. Now, if you look at the 10 Commandments, now honoring the Sabbath means staying away from church. Honoring your mother and father means keeping your distance. We can't see our grandchildren right now. Coveting your neighbor's goods means if you buy too much toilet paper or hand sanitizer. Who thought hoarding goods could be a violation of the 8th commandment? And the way we do not kill today is by taking a variety of steps that leave us feeling restricted and alone. Even the corporal works of mercy are tough. Feeding the hungry, sheltering the homeless, that requires massive structural governmental action, not just our own charity. Burying the dead, in Italy, they can't do that. Sister Carol told us yesterday of a funeral she had been at, only 10 people were allowed to be there. And we can't visit the sick or the imprisoned in the ways that we would like to. The one corporal and spiritual work of mercy that is still very much a mandate for us is to pray for the living and the dead. And so as we begin this online dialogue, I would ask Sister Carol to open with a word of prayer for us as we face up to the moral and other challenges that face us as individuals, as institutions, and as a nation. Sister Carol?
Thank you, John. It will surprise no one that I went directly to the Catholic Health Association website to look at their prayers, particularly for coping with this pandemic. Loving God, Holy One, your desire is for our wholeness and well-being. We hold in tenderness and prayer the collective suffering of our world at this time. We grieve precious lives lost and vulnerable lives threatened. We ache for ourselves and our neighbors, standing before an uncertain future. We pray, may love, not fear, go viral. Inspire our leaders to discern and choose wisely, aligned with the common good. Help us to practice social distancing and reveal to us new and creative ways to come together in spirit and in solidarity. Call us to profound trust in your faithful presence. You, the God who does not abandon, you, the Holy One, breathing within us, breathing among us, breathing around us, in our beautiful yet wounded world. We ask all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, sister. Well, we have a wonderful panel to focus on this, and our topic is Catholic social thought and the crisis. And so what I'm going to ask each of our panelists in turn is how our faith and how the principles of Catholic social teaching can guide our responses for us individually and as a society. Let me begin with you, Father Miles. Father Miles Sheehan is a Jesuit, obviously a priest. He's also a physician. He worked at Loyola in Chicago and now is at Georgetown at the Pellegrino Center on Bioethics, teaching and writing. And he served for a while as the provincial of the New England province of Jesuits, and now works with older Jesuits. So he's a physician, he's an ethicist, he's a priest, he's a pastor. What do you think our faith and our Catholic social teaching can offer us as we live in this time of fear and loss, Father?
St. Ignatius Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, said that love is shown in deeds, not words. And so I think I'd like to emphasize the ways in which people are doing that by distancing, by being on the phone with people they care about. But I'd also like to talk about all the healthcare workers and their current heroic efforts in caring for people. And to also think about folks who maybe seem a little bit distant, but the cashier at the CVS store, or the folks who are still there at the grocery store who are, manning or personing the cash registers and keeping society going. I also think that as we look at this, that our faith teaches us in respecting human dignity, that we remember what Dr. Pellegrino from the center used to talk about, that we try to maintain the personal connection to the extent possible in this stressful time between the physician and the patient, between the healthcare worker and the patient. And Dr. Pellegrino used to talk about the medical decision-making should be the patient is able to explain what is the good for them in the context of their illness, and the physician attempts to come up with the right healing action. Currently, that means that we're looking very carefully about expanding beds, ICU capacity, working in a number of ways to try to make sure that the supplies, which are currently limited, are produced. And also to think about ways, if conditions worsen, and perhaps that's the case in New York City now, that we're able to look to protect the vulnerable, to be very careful about limits that we might place on treatment so that they do not prejudice the socially disadvantaged or the disabled, to be very careful about things like simply using an age limit. These are the kinds of things that I think are showing deeds and that express the church's teaching on caring for people in a serious condition. Human dignity is always balanced with the common good. Just as we look at the incarnation, that's human dignity. And then we look at the Trinity as a community of love. So we need to look at our communities with respect for the individual and ways in which we can balance that. And a time like this certainly stresses it.
Thank you very much, Father. I remind you can join us at hashtag CSC coronavirus or the initiative at CST, Public Life on Twitter. Let me turn to you. John Monahan is a friend and he's an ally of the initiative. He's a big deal at Georgetown. He is the senior advisor to President DeGioia on global health issues. He worked in the last administration with both HHS and the State Department on epidemics. Father talked about the patient and the doctor. Your focus is on policy and the world and the nation. Help us understand some of the moral dimensions, some of the ways in which Catholic social teaching should shape the macro response to this.
Oh, sure. Well, thank you, John, and I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this forum. I guess I'd say I of course agree with everything Father Miles said, but I'm trying to. I would say to your point, I was reflecting on the fact that I've worked in two very different institutions. Currently at Georgetown, obviously as a Jesuit private Catholic university, the language of Catholic social teaching, the balance between, and I love the way Father Miles talked about human dignity and the common good. I also think about is about human responsibility. How do we think about what we owe each other in promoting the common good? And so at Georgetown, I think one of the privileges here is that Catholic social teaching is part of the language, and you can see that in the communication that with the President DeGioia and other leaders have made as we made big complicated decisions to move students to online teaching, to get prepared as we're going to need to be with our hospital partner for what I'm sure is going to be a sad and difficult surge. So those are sort of immediate problems. Obviously in government, the language of Catholic social teaching isn't something that's explicit, but I would say the moral dimensions are even more powerful. And so as you referenced, I had the good fortune to serve in the Obama administration. And when I was at HHS, it was during the H1n1 pandemic. And during that period, a lot of the same discussions that we had today, especially at the beginning of that outbreak, when it seemed that novel influenza virus could potentially be much more severe than it was, a lot of these discussions came up about how do you communicate risk to people? How do you prepare our health system to be ready for something like a pandemic, like what we're seeing now with COVID-19? And every one of those things is a balance, John, because I think on the one hand, we live in a large, diverse society, so we're not going to use the exact terms of Catholic social teaching, but we have to use moral language because it's a moral trade-off. If you're asking people, if we're constraining individual freedom and rights on behalf of doing something that is going to benefit the public good or actually benefit people that you'll never know. There's 300 million people in this country. There's 7 billion people on Earth. If we take steps to mitigate, those steps are going to save lives that we don't know. And so to me, in my mind, the notion of solidarity that comes out of Catholicism is really powerful. And I would argue that it's also something, it's a moral frame that we can bring to public life. And I'll just give you one final example, and I'm afraid that it's going to be on our screen very soon. During H1n1, President Obama made a decision, and I was involved in this, where we decided when vaccines were going to be produced, that the U.S. would share 10% of the vaccines that we made with the WHO for the benefit of low and middle income countries. Now, as we go through this COVID-19 pandemic, that's a moral decision. It's not a decision made on national needs. It's a decision it's obviously a decision we want to cooperate with the larger world, but it's also a decision that we're part of a global world and that the United States is part of it. My sense is that we're going to face some tough decisions as a country as we get resources, whether they're antivirals or diagnostics or ultimately vaccines. How much are we going to be willing to share? And that's ultimately a moral issue. So I think the past is prologue to what we're going to be facing.
Raina, Father talked about the patient and the doctor. John talked about the whole world. In some ways, you're the most important person in this conversation. You're not a university official. You're not a priest or a sister. You're a lay Catholic who runs a wonderful restaurant in Bethesda. And you face all the questions of how you're going to keep your family together, how your workers are going to make it, how you serve a community that includes lots of immigrants. Help us understand how our faith should shape how this crisis affects people at the very local level, in a small business, restaurant workers, immigrants in Bethesda.
Well, thank you, John. I thank you for the kindness of the words and for inviting me into this discussion. I am from El Salvador, living in the area for 30 years. Opened a restaurant in January 2007 with my husband when the recession started. It took us many years to build up our clientele. And when we were happy that business was running and we were able to help our community and some of the seniors that we help, all the time we wake up that we fall down into this COVID-19. We are 2 weeks ago, my husband and I were not scared. But then the day after, when everything was going to be shut down, we took the big decision, a heartbreaking decision, to lay off all of our employees and stay open, my son, my husband, and myself. Then with the help of all the communities, our regular customers and our neighbors, we were able to open back the restaurant and bring back 4 employees, which they have little children. And that brought to our attention, my husband and I, that so many documented people around the United States will be losing their jobs and will not be able to get anything, the aid that the government was supposed to help. So we are thankful to God, thanks to all this help from the customers, regular customers, and our neighbors are able to produce and help back and give back to the communities. But it's just, we're thinking what is going to happen once this is over. Yes.
You've been able to bring back some of your workers because your customers are coming to you for takeout meals. Is that the case?
Yes. And that's only from our regular customers and neighbors that are pulling that together. And we are a bridge to support 4 more families. 4 jobs were brought back to our Guardados restaurant. And therefore, we are also helping some few seniors that they cannot come out. They are our regular customers as well. They are on their 80s, and we were able to deliver the food.
Thank you much, Reina. Sister Carol, so we've talked about the patient and the doctor, the world, and a local community. You have spent your life in Catholic healthcare. I first got to know you as a nurse and the director of the Center for Life, and then as the administrator of Providence, and then as head of Catholic healthcare. I think you were named the most powerful person in healthcare a while ago. Talk to us about what this is doing to the values, the people, the moral principles that are at the heart of Catholic healthcare.
John, this crisis forces us, all of us, to make lots of decisions, both personal ones and to contribute to the collective ones as part of our civic communities in our cities, in our states, in our country. Catholic social teaching is based on the belief in the God-given dignity of each person and the gospel admonition to love our neighbor as ourselves. Fortunately, there are echoes of this in the founding documents of our country. All are created equal, Everyone has a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We are fortunate that our faith and our national beliefs are so supportive of these wonderful positions because they provide a touchstone to evaluate critical decisions and hopefully avoid dangerous mistakes. How we make tough decisions for the common good, whether they are to mandate isolation, social distancing, closing schools, canceling major sports events and other public gatherings, and major economic decisions regarding businesses and borders, all will benefit greatly from using the principles of Catholic social teaching. In addition, in our effort to assure that those who are poor and those who have no voice are not left out or least in line during this pandemic, we look to Catholic social teaching and those founding documents to make decisions about resources and support based on the principle that everyone deserves protection. The unborn to the elderly, the richest to the most destitute, those born here and those who just arrived. Catholic social teaching is really an invaluable tool in times like this, as we try to assure that our personal decisions and those of our country are made based on the principles that will serve everyone as well as we can. We saw a bit of that in the debate over this last bill in the Senate and now in the House, balancing different common good needs and competing needs at times. And so I think as we go forward, and we have a long way to go, it is going to be important that we are very conscious and very capable of using Catholic social teaching as we evaluate our own decisions and we evaluate the decisions that we are part of as citizens.
Thank you, Sister. Well, let me put that to a test. We already have a couple questions on this, and we've talked about the individual and the doctor. We've talked about the nation and the world, the local community, and Catholic healthcare. Now we have a debate in the country and in parts of the Catholic community on whether, quote, the cure is worse than the disease. That the effort to distance ourselves, to quarantine, to shut down parts of our lives and the economy will end up doing more damage than our efforts to save the lives, especially of the weak and the vulnerable. The sense is, frankly, quite bluntly, is some of us that are really old or very vulnerable, we don't have that much to offer. And if we don't go so far in shutting down the economy, maybe life will be better for all the rest of us. This is real. I mean, you watch Twitter and everything else. This is a real discussion. What in our tradition helps us assess this question? What are the moral? What are the economic? What are the human? What are the practical implications of a choice to, in some ways, take a large economic hit in order to save the lives of many, especially the old and the vulnerable, or those who say that could do more damage in the long run, and maybe we need to reopen the economy as quickly as we can and just take the human consequences. Father Miles, do you have a take on that?
I think it's way too soon for us to be talking about opening up the country or the economy. You have to look at what's happening in New York now and the numbers that are rising across the United States. If we open things up now, it's not just the elderly who are going to be in trouble. The hospitals are going to be overrun. There are plenty of young people in the United States who are on ventilators right now. We're going to be swamped, and this ongoing pandemic is going to create a greater hit to the economy than the difficult choice now to keep us isolated, keep us distant, unfortunately, to have businesses be closed. But it's way too soon for us to be jumping the gun. You know, all I can think of is Jesus said, "What you did to the least of my brothers." So we decided to go out to work so everyone could die. It's way too soon to be thinking like that.
Sister, you've been through lots of questions not exactly like this, but questions of human life versus economics, the market, and the mission. What's your take?
John, I think that equation calls for the worst in our faith and the worst in our country. That is so contrary to our faith and so contrary to the values of this country. We did see pieces of that in the issues with the SARS and certainly with the early AIDS crisis in the country. But we would take a giant step back as a people and therefore as a nation to try to put those kinds of equations up. We have always been better together. And, just as there are some times when people use more of certain resources than other people are using, that balances out. And that's what makes us a great nation. That's what makes us people worthy of our Creator. I mean, it is just, even to posit that is a giant step back for civilization. And we're too great a country to be considering that.
Sister, I saw Cardinal Michael Cherney, who worked in Africa during the AIDS epidemic, pandemic there and here, and he said there was one sentence that summarized. He says, some are infected and all are affected. I think we have to see it that way. Rena, do you have a take on this straight up? You're trying to keep a business alive, keep a family going, keep a restaurant together. How do you see this?
I want to take the questions to what you were saying, that I have the feeling that, in my opinion, we should shut down for 2 or 3 weeks, everyone at home, including ourselves, so this pandemic will not be worse than what it is right now. I'm just worried about so many vulnerable people that will be more affected than what I see in my community is that the Hispanic community, especially, they will be very affected. So, in my opinion, I have the feeling that we should shut down everything so we can, just stay in prayers with our families. That my daughter is here from LA before everything started. It's just, as a Catholic, my moral decision will be just staying home, isolated in prayer with the family, than little by little going to what we are going through.
That's impressive in light of what you've said about all the work and time it took to build up your restaurant. John, can I take you in a little bit different direction on this?
Sure.
You talked eloquently about solidarity. One of the principles of Catholic social teaching is subsidiarity, which is sort of how we divide up the work and who has responsibility for what. You've worked in government, you're now at Georgetown. There's a lot of back and forth about who should do what, who is responsible for what. Can you use those principles of solidarity and subsidiarity to help us sort out where responsibility lies?
Well, the way I think of it, John, is I think one of the advantages of solidarity is it lets us think through these kind of the question that you just raised, and it seems to me there's at least 2 pernicious issues in there that are worth thinking through. One is, how do we operate in an area of uncertainty? Father Miles is exactly right. We don't know how serious this is going to be, and we need to be and to err on this, and to err on the side of risk when you don't need to is wrong. And then the second thing is, I think in any moral calculation about solidarity, we need to decide how we value people. And implied in some of the comments about the cure being worse than the disease is some devaluation of some people versus others. The idea that some people who are weaker or older or more vulnerable matter less. So then the question, it seems to me, is, to your point about subsidiarity, John, is where do we assign responsibilities? And I've always thought that actually the Catholic framework is a good one, though I will say that I do think sometimes people use subsidiarity as an argument against government action at the national and international level. But let's be honest, this is a global virus that is going to cause a global crisis. And so there has to be a response at every level, the individual, the city, the state, the nation, the world. So we got to figure out who does what. And I agree, there's always going to be a little blurriness between the lines, but I would start with the proposition that we can't win this thing unless we have a sense that all 7 billion of us have a threat from this virus, and that we should expect all the institutions that serve us, including the United Nations, our means of international cooperation, all the way down to our individual social distancing, to have a role. I would say when you think of the immediate problems we're facing, there's a set of failures and responsibilities on the part of the federal government in particular. One of the challenges of planning for one of these is to have every nation be at least prepared to respond if an outbreak occurs. And I think we've remarkably fallen down in a way that I wouldn't have expected. Examples being like the testing kits, the fact that our hospital surge planning is behind course. We are, as I alluded to earlier, we're going to face this internationally very soon, because the global needs, if you think the needs are serious here, wait till this pandemic moves through Africa and places that have far weaker health systems than ours, and we're going to be faced with very hard challenges about who responds. I hope that's responsive.
Thanks, John. You mentioned that sometimes subsidiarity is misused. It's always important to remember it goes in two directions at once. One says that large institutions should not overwhelm smaller institutions. And that's true in this crisis. There are some things only families can do for each other. Neighborhoods are rallying together to serve each other. And frankly, local and state government have taken the lead. But those smaller institutions also have a right to call on the big institutions, like the federal government, when human life and dignity are at stake. And this pandemic doesn't know state boundaries or city boundaries or even national boundaries. So we had got to understand both sides of subsidiarity. Sister, we've gotten a couple questions. One is from Joanne Stirrup, who's a Georgetown student, asking about how this impacts healthcare workers. You're a nurse, you run a hospital, you've worked with leaders of Catholic healthcare. What are the burdens, burden isn't a word, the crushing responsibilities we're putting on people in our healthcare institutions? Pope Francis called them the other day the saints next door who go to work every day. And how do they sort out the ethical responsibilities to their patients, to their families, to their colleagues, when they're short of equipment, when they're overwhelmed? How does this affect healthcare workers, and how do they make the ethical judgments, and can Catholic social teaching help them with that?
John, I was so pleased to hear Father Miles speak about the Catholic health, the healthcare workers that are out there. I have seen them through many a natural disaster, the AIDS crisis, and some of the other crises that have affected us. This one is bigger than all of them. And I would say you couldn't exaggerate how challenging this is for them and how much we should be supporting them and praying for them. I agree with John. I don't think they've gotten the kind of support that they need from the national government. I think states have tried their very best in most cases to step up, to help, to push forward. But this is a national crisis, and it needs everything that's possible. You think about the fact that they are put in positions, people who have children, people who are pregnant, people who have parents that are old, and they're worried about not only getting the disease themselves, but giving it to their children, to their unborn child, to their elderly parents. They are put in the position of not being there for their children when their children are out of school and frightened about what this means. They are put in a position of having to take care of patients, having no idea if the flimsy material they are using and reusing is protecting them and consequently protecting their families. You know, all of us are challenged right now to make the right kinds of decisions. We're challenged to find food for our families in supermarkets that are no longer super. These folks don't have the time to be able to go out and do that. And in addition, one of the things physicians and nurses fear most is going home at night and sort of reliving what they did that day and finding that they made some horrible mistake or they left something undone. They are faced today with lots and lots of choices they have no opportunity to avoid. They have to make those choices, and they're not good choices. They're looking for the least good choice to avoid. And so you can't exaggerate what we're dealing with this very minute. Now, you know, the Holy Father is probably one of the popes in all of history that has such a great appreciation. He calls his favorite metaphor for the church seems to be a field hospital. I know that he has a great appreciation, and I know that people are realizing more and more what it means to be not only working this hard, but working under this much stress. And I think as Father Miles and John have both said, we don't know how much worse it's going to get, both in our country and for those who are part of groups that go overseas, Catholic Relief Services and Doctors Without Borders. I mean, I live in fear and dread of the coronavirus hitting a refugee camp. So I think we've got to do everything humanly possible to demand action, to demand supplies, to demand support for them, and to find ways that we might be able to help even in some small way to show them how much they're appreciated, because you cannot exaggerate the burden that healthcare personnel and the support staff that are assisting them are bearing right now. And at a time when many of the rest of us are home, complaining about being bored, complaining about having nothing to do. And so I think it is really wonderful to see the governors speaking so strongly and pushing so hard. But I think we as individuals have to do that as well.
Father Miles, you've spent a lot of time caring for patients and working with healthcare professionals. Do you want to add anything to that about the burdens and choices they face?
I think Sister Carol spoke well. One of the things that I read somewhere was a doctor speaking about how some of the ethicists are talking so glibly about how doctors and nurses have to go and treat people and that it's part of their duty. I think that's true, and no longer an active caregiver, I feel a little bad not being able to be there. The other part that I really just find is I think we remember sometime in the early 2000s with the Iraq War when we were sending soldiers out without appropriate protective equipment, that the armored vehicles weren't armored, that they didn't have body armor. I really find it terrifying that there aren't masks, there aren't enough personal protective equipment, there aren't gloves. There is a way in which we're sending people out on the front lines without the basic means to defend themselves. And that's just awful. People are really working hard to change that. But one of the things that, and sort of after this with Truth and Reconciliation, I think we really need to look at how do we look at the next time this happens so people are not put into such terrible situations. There's a wonderful book about errors in medicine called Forgive and Remember. I don't think that there's a need to have mass finger pointing and blaming, but we really need to figure out how we will do better for the future and how in particular we can mobilize. I think things will be better in the United States in a couple months, and I think things will be awful in Africa then. So how can we mobilize to help the rest of the world at a time, which has always been one of the ways in which I think the United States has been blessed by God to be generous, and it's important that that continues.
Reina, we have a couple questions. One of them is from Danny Rueda. I have lots of what I thought were wonderful questions about the principles of Catholic social teaching I was going to ask you, but the ones that are coming in on texted to me are better. Here's what Danny says. My whole family is Salvadorian and still has to go to work because their workplaces have not closed or offered other options. Every day they're putting their lives at risk because they don't know whether their workplaces are taking proper measures. As their son and brother, I want them to stay at home, but they say, how am I supposed to pay the bills? And then he goes on to say, what do you recommend to individuals who have to make this tough decision? And how can we respond to this in a systemic way? So I think I'm going to ask Reina to start, and then John is sort of our policy guy to help us with how we can respond in a systemic way. But Reina, these are questions you face in your own family and your own community. How do you resolve these tough choices?
The first day, almost 2 weeks ago, when I told the employees that we had to close the restaurant, it was devastated to me to say that. But then when we got the choice to open the restaurant, what I did, and my husband and I did, is that to make our place very secure for them, that we are picking up the employees from their house and cleaning, sanitizing the whole here, the restaurants, and asking when the customers come to the restaurant to stay, separate from each other, so we protect the customers as well as our employees, and keeping my grandchildren's nieces at home, not coming from home because we have to feed, we have to pay bills. I'm a small place, so we took that harsh decision to open the restaurant, but at the same time protect ourselves from not, keeping ourselves in dangers. And we are doing that by picking up the employees and keeping the customers kind of far from each other. So we are, I guess, protecting and at the same time providing a job for these employees and keeping us in a community.
John, what about a more systemic, structural response to those terrible choices? How did this piece of legislation that's going through the House now address that?
Well, John, I think this, among the many things this coronavirus outbreak has revealed, is just the fragile and torn nature of our social safety net here in the United States. I mean, the bottom line is when people lose their jobs, they don't have access, they don't have replacement income. Our unemployment insurance system has covers way too few workers. We choose this, other countries and have chosen to have more robust social safety nets that people can fall back on. We're now seeing what happens when frontline workers, whether it's in the restaurant industry or retail, or think of all the people who are working in the hospitality industry who their jobs are gone and they're all hourly wages and they can't work, and not everybody has somebody as good as Reina as their boss that's trying to do all that they can. So what did this bill do? I would say that we shouldn't understate it. It made some very important improvements in unemployment insurance in terms of making more people eligible and extending benefits. But it's still, we still are going to be facing, and it also provided direct payments to individuals, which will come sometime in the next several weeks. But the bottom line is, John, we've got a long way to go to have a system that's going to help people. And I always think the way we should be thinking about this is these economic supports that we're providing are part of our public health strategy. We can't we can't respond to this as a country in solidarity, to use Catholic social teaching phrase, if we're not able to say to somebody, I know you've lost your job or your job has gone away for the next several months, but we know you have a family. We know that you have to pay rent. We have to be thinking about, do we need eviction moratoriums? Do we need utilities shut off moratoria? There's a whole range of things we have to do to protect people if we're going to ask them to take this, to play their part in the public health response. So that's how I think we have a lot more to do. And I hope when this is done, we'll think not only how are we better prepared for the next public health crisis, but why can't we live like this every day, where we have a decent safety net to protect people who lose their jobs?
For those who are on the call or on the online, the Circle of Protection is a group of Christian religious leaders, our bishops, Catholic Charities, Bread for the World, Sojourners, National Association of Evangelicals, that's been working for years, but especially in this moment, to protect the people who are most vulnerable, the least of these, to use biblical language. And some of the things we worked for got into the legislation. One of the last things that was decided was there was a proposal for a 15% increase in food stamps, SNAP it's called now. And at the very end, at midnight, that fell out of the bill. Hopefully it'll come back. But the very idea of helping people eat when they don't have work, they don't have wages. Can I ask you, I saw your hand up, Rena, Sean Doherty, you can continue with this, but Sean Doherty says, and he's a student as well, Pope Francis is a proponent for forms of local commerce that encourage encounter and sustainability. Sounds like your restaurant. How can communities best support small business directly during this time while abiding with state and federal sanctions? How can we help?
The way as I say before, the regular customers and our community neighbors that are placing an order through guardados, that's how they can support. But I want to go back and comment about what Father Miles was saying. I am worried about it that some of us may get a check, but many families out there will not get a check. And I'm just, in myself as a Catholic, we teach how to be, conscious and get being a moral, not being selfish. And I just worry, how is this gonna how these people, undocumented people, will get help. Sometimes I don't sleep thinking of that I may get a check. I don't have insurance, but I may get a little money to pay for a doctor, but they will not get paid. That is really something that I worry is more than my health.
Yeah. In our tradition, human dignity is not something you earn by your good behavior or your utility. It doesn't depend on where you come from or when you got here. And we need to lift that up in times of enormous stress like this. There have been a number of questions of a similar sort. Jackson Wolford of AEI talked about, because of necessary social distancing, it's the crisis is undermining our basic moral reflex to run towards suffering. How can lay Catholics work with parishes or other organizations to help those suffering when we have to remain physically distant? Or can we find other ways to be necessary and instead of feeling useless and in some ways demoralized? And related to that, there are several questions. Let me just look here. Patricia Becerra, with the shutdown of churches, no masses, no sacraments, how will this affect the faith and the membership of the faithful? So 2 questions. How can we fulfill our obligation to care for the least of these when we can't be physically present? And how do we keep up a sense of community when we can't gather for worship or to advance the mission of the church? Anybody want to grab that? Father?
Just a couple things to think of practically. and it also would relate to the mission of the church, would be to think if you could email your local parish and ask if there are older people in the parish who might need assistance, that you could do their shopping for them. The second thing would be that probably parishes are going to be asked for money for people who are in desperate situations. And are there ways in which you can contribute to, say, the ability of the parish to give out alms, to work on a very local level that way? The other question about what sustains our faith, well, you know, whatsoever you do to the least of my brothers, and right now, I think it's a gospel mandate that we stay away from each other, and that's part of our faith. That might seem like a funny way to show solidarity, but there's a way in which we're in this together. When you think about, and the situation isn't exactly analogous, about churches under persecution, for instance, in Eastern Europe or in China, how did people maintain their faith? They weren't able to have large gatherings. They weren't able to celebrate the Eucharist. But there were ways in which people maintained their prayer life, maintained the ability to read the scriptures, to be able to, something that wasn't possible then, to look on television, to participate in the Mass that way. This really is a time for, since we have more time on our hands, to think about deeper prayer. You know, one of the things as Jesuits is we're supposed to look at being contemplatives in action. Well, at a time when there's not quite as much action, what's going on in the world around us, and what does it say? What does it say to us about God's action in this world? I actually am getting a lot of hope out of it, about seeing how generous the vast majority of people are. I'm getting a lot of hope in which people are raising strong voices to say that the dollar is not almighty, that we need to look in other ways. And yes, there are going to be some hard decisions, but for now, we need to look at protecting people. With some of the ethical discussions I've been on with dealing with some horrible what ifs, the tremendous sensitivity I've seen to making sure that the disabled, the socially disadvantaged, the elderly are not discriminated against in a way that is simply not treating them as fully human. There is a lot of hope there, and I think for people who are feeling a bit trapped, there are some positive signs of God's grace that's operating in a time that's not a heck of a lot of fun. And I would try to get people to pay attention to that.
Yeah. I'm going to call on John and Sister Carol, but Kim and Anna, Kim Daniels and Anna Missler did so much to make this possible, know that I am not an early morning person. But the other day, I set the alarm and was ready to pray the Our Father with the Holy Father at 7 a.m. with the rest of the world. And I have probably said the Our Father a million times in my life. And that was a special moment, to have the feeling that all of us together were praying for the sick and those who cared for them. So there are ways, even when we're alone in our room, that we can be connected. John, how can the church help us when we can't do the normal things of reaching out physically to those in need? And how do we have a sense of community when the measure of our care for one another is keeping our distance?
John, I'd say maybe three things. One is we all know people who are shut in. If we're experiencing it ourselves right now, imagine people who are, I think it's good to reflect on the people in our lives or in our broader network, whether they're our neighbors or relatives. We can call people. Just hearing from somebody else can make a difference. A sense that we're together, a personal outreach. It's always better to do it in person, but plan B can be a call. Two is I want to emphasize this point about donations. And I know money isn't always the answer, but money can help a lot. A lot of the nonprofit organizations that are going to be key to serving people over time are closed themselves right now, are facing a crisis. They may have to be thinking about alternative ways to meet the needs of people that they work with. You think of everything from soup kitchens to food banks to even I know legal advocacy groups are not, that usually see clients face to face, are now doing it by phone. How do we support that? because as we, like, for example, the immigration courts haven't closed in this crisis. So, I mean, we just need to think about different ways in which money and time can matter. And then the last thing is advocacy. You know, in the last 3 weeks, the federal government has spent $2.5 trillion in public policy, more than I can remember. The largest spending bills ever. They reflect our priorities. And if we're not on the phone with our members of Congress, with people with organizations that we're a part of to try to influence that, reflecting our values, then I think we've missed an enormous opportunity.
Well, if we don't raise our voices about whether our national priority ought to be able to be together at Easter, we could end up there. Sister, when Father was talking about supporting your local parish, I was thinking about St. Ambrose. You and I are both members of St. Ambrose, and I'm sure Father Charlie would appreciate a gift, at least from me. So what should we do when we can't serve in the way we think we should, and we don't have the community that we thought we had?
You know, John, just like Father Miles and John said, a number of the things that they mentioned would be things I would encourage as well. I also think the creativity that we've seen out there, the live streaming of things, and clearly the use of electronic media has been a wonderful help. You saw people that couldn't throw a birthday party for their little girl, and she didn't understand social distancing. So everybody took a turn driving in and beeping the horn and holding a sign, "Happy Birthday." You saw wonderful things with people doing visits between Glass and the nursing home and making people laugh and enjoy. I think that, as well as bringing food and things like that to people who can't get it. I know that my brother, who does Meals on Wheels, was stopped from doing it because Meals on Wheels, for safety reasons, didn't want anyone over 70. So those of us under 70 or who have time off could pick up the slack in things like Meals on Wheels. I think that using the opportunity to talk about our faith, to talk about what it means, using the opportunity to show, to encourage people to see a movie, to talk with little children, to get a little toy for a child and give it to somebody who is a neighbor or who you know doesn't have the ability or has to work, and the child feels even more alone. I think it is really going to be important to use all our creativity and our commitment. I see many ways that the church is doing that, and all as much as they can give, because people really are minding not being able to be together and express their faith. But I think the fact that we're all in it together and people are trying to be creative and share that creativity with each other creates an enormous solidarity. The other thing I would say is there are not a lot of places we go to shop, but wherever you go to shop or to get a service like your gas station or the drugstore or your grocery store, thank the clerks, thank the people who are stocking, thank the folks that are cleaning the carts so that you don't have to touch the cart somebody just used. Tell them how much you appreciate it. It's those kinds of things that create an enormous sense of solidarity and help people who are really feeling pressured right now.
Mm-hmm. I want to acknowledge that Norma Canedo at St. Matthew's asked a very similar question about what are the creative ways that parishioners and others can reach out to those in need. So that's been a consistent theme. Sarah Babson said, what advice do you have for listeners in their daily choices and actions, in addition to not hoarding and complying with public health officials' requests? We've sort of started that conversation. Say thank you to people. Raina, what do you think ordinary folks should be doing to contribute to the common good, to defend human life and dignity?
I was thinking of what Father Miles said about the mask. You don't know what you're missing until you lose it. It feels so, I used to go to a daily mass, and now what I do is in the morning, the day that we had to pray our Father, that I don't wake up at 7 a.m. and I also put the alarm. I guess we have to think nowadays that the beauty of the YouTube, that we were able to watch Pope Francis Mass on our Annunciation Day, which was on Wednesday. But I started to use the word thank you also to the clerks. Just like us, we cannot be at home. We are cooking, preparing, but we have to be more grateful that we had a job and we have people that we are feeding, but at the same time we are helping other people. I want to mention something when you say give back to the community. I went to few places to offer our food and they were scared. I just sent an email this morning to Children's Inn because I knew they wanted meals for the parents of children that had cancer in there. I haven't received any response. But if you know somebody that they can get back to us, we really wanted to feed those parents that are there. They are really they're in need for us to feed them. The parents of children that have cancer and Children's Inn in Bethesda, NIH. Yeah, so we can pass the words.
And sometimes,
yeah.
Sometimes you do that for people and you don't even know it. I'm not a panelist, but I'll tell a story. Our daughter-in-law is starting a new job at an essential medical supply company. And part of the arrangement was my wife Linda was gonna take care of the kids a couple days. And the more we listened, the more it seemed like that was a really bad idea. And we thought, how could we do this? Probably not good. And I said, well, I just write. And I said, you know what? This is not a good idea. And we know it's going to impose real problems on you. And they wrote and they said, last night we decided we want you around for a long time and having you take care of the kids, you meaning Linda. I play with them for about 10 minutes and then I go online. But that wouldn't be a good idea. And I can't tell you what a relief it was for us to have our kids say, we understand. And even though you feel sad and we feel sad, this is the right thing to do. So several people are asking about more policy things. One person said, let me find it. We have seen little from our ethical leaders in our Catholic healthcare system. This is from Nancy Churras, a physician and a doctor. I believe they are working on guidelines, but their timeline may be very different than those of working in the ED and in the hospital. Could Sister Carol use her position to implore those ethical leaders in the Catholic healthcare system to lead the conversation and do so quickly? This is something both Sister Carol and Miles have worked on for a long time. How do we get good advice to people who are in the middle of the battle?
John, I would say I don't have the position anymore, but I do know CHA is working very closely with its membership at the level of the ethicists and at the level of the physicians and nurses. And I know they'll keep doing that. I'm getting a little concerned about some of and Miles mentioned it, sort of the rush choices. We have to decide who's not going to be resuscitated. I think we have more experience with some of these tough choices than people realize. If you've been in healthcare for any length of time, you've seen the challenge when someone calls and says, we have a patient with such and such a problem in the emergency room, we've got to get them in ICU. Or we had a patient in the OR crash and we've got to bring him to ICU. We didn't expect that. And ICU is full. And everybody that's in ICU we assumed needed to be in ICU. And then you start the scramble. So we've had these kinds of challenges before. They're never easy. And we work diligently not to sacrifice the well-being of any patient and still meet needs. And that drove the development of the step-down units. And so I think you can't just make a moral principle and say, now just apply this and make it work. Even without this pandemic, you can't take ethical principles and say, here's the principle, just apply it, it'll work. That is not possible when we're dealing with human life and human beings. And so I think we've got to all be in this. We've got to draw on the resources and the experiences we've had before. When do you close emergency rooms? All of these things we've dealt with, we're going to have to deal with them on an increased urgency, but we need to draw on that. And we also need to understand that no matter how hard we work, we're not going to get a sort of cookie cutter principle that we can apply and know we've done the right thing. That's one of the real challenges right now.
Father Miles?
To Nancy Churros, who was one of my medical students at Loyola, now working in the emergency room down in Florida. I think one of the things we talked about subsidiarity is to realize that different places in the country are different places right now with regard to the epidemic. I think that the general way to look at it now, in one of the ways that I'm seeing different proposals, is first, even though coronavirus is a new thing, there have been illnesses before, and we're able to make decisions. So when I saw a patient, when I was practicing, it wasn't necessarily the age that led me to make a decision about whether to recommend to go aggressive or to work in a different way. It had to do with a variety of other physiologic scores. So I think it's really important that we look at what are the best evidence-based criteria that we have available at this time as we make decisions, as we move forward from what is currently a burden on the hospitals in many parts of the country, but hasn't yet reached a crisis. And then to be able to think about how we can still attempt to try to have the right healing action for each person, recognizing that's going to be incredibly stressed, that looks very carefully that we are not coming up with rules that systematically disadvantage those who have already been disadvantaged in our communities. So, for instance, when I was in practice, and if someone in their 90s came in with a history of Alzheimer's disease and they had an overwhelming pneumonia, my recommendation was not to treat them aggressively. Not because I didn't value their life or think that their life had great value as someone made in the image and likeness of God. I realized that there's a thing called natural death. And as I always used to say, if God's calling, it's unwise to give a busy signal. Likewise now with people who will have overwhelming coronavirus and the situation where they have multiple comorbid conditions, it's unlikely to do well. It's important that we're having even more carefully those difficult conversations with patients and their families about what are their goals for treatment in this particular setting, what are achievable goals, and then what other goals might be there that are related to the deepest wishes of the person, to be cared for with dignity, to have pain and symptoms treated. If my life cannot be prolonged, I don't want to be left alone. Those kind of things that we can talk about and really need to have those crucial conversations. Those are one of the things I'm pushing, along with looking at objective criteria. This gets in the weeds, but people are looking at a thing called the SOFA score, which has some issues with it, but it's a sequential organ failure assessment as part of the way to help decide who may have the best shot if they're doing extremely badly. But things to say, age cutoffs or this condition or that condition, I'd be really, really careful with that.
Yeah. While we've been on this dialogue, the United States has become the place in the world that has the most cases of coronavirus and now has more than 1,000 deaths. One thing Father Miles said, the tragedy of losing so many people, but the thought of so many people dying alone is just tragic. Sister, and maybe John, a couple of people have asked about two specifics. One is, and I think Father Miles talked about this idea of do not resuscitate orders for people based on age or condition or disability or just sort of arbitrariness. And the second question is, different regions have different problems, different levels. Some, New York, it's clearly suffering the most, but others probably are not far behind. What can we learn from what's going on, and what are the regional dimensions of that? I'm going to ask John that, and I'd ask Sister to start with, what about, I think Father called it a glib talk about just do not resuscitate. You know, some people, you know, they won't live that long, their life won't be that great. On the other hand, not all of us need to live until the last possible moment. How do people make those choices? How does a country make those choices, Sister? And then John on regional and national responses. And then Raina, I want to come back to you about what the rest of us can do.
John,
Sister?
you know, I think we need to remember that today and every day, the patient, as Father Miles pointed out, has the right to make those decisions for themselves. And if not, to have their power of attorney. And there are people who make it really clear what they want out of extended care. So I think we need to look at that first. Secondly, I would say arbitrary cutoffs absolutely panic people. Remember in the early days of the Affordable Care Act, when they were trying to get the legislation put together, people were saying after 70 you couldn't have insulin and those kinds of things. Those things they're pure lunacy to be trying to look at people's lives like that. So I would say to you that we need to stay away from that. We have a long and wonderful tradition in Catholic healthcare and in healthcare in general at looking at the kinds of factors that Father Miles talked about, and we need to do that. We have many challenges in explaining to people why why there's nothing more we can do for your loved one, and why there's no legitimate way of caring. We also have a lot of times when we have to look carefully at the burden and benefit of possible treatments. Not every possible treatment is a good choice. And so helping people, and you can't put that on automatic pilot. It means sitting down, it means getting people on the same page, and recognizing the autonomy of the patient. And those are important choices to make. And the importance of taking the time can't be overemphasized. And people understand, and people will come back and express their gratitude. And they will also will also very often say they want the things Father Miles talked about. They want pain control, dignity, family with them. One of the problems we have right now is because of what we don't know about this virus, we can't sometimes have family with them. Because of what we don't know about this virus, for some of our healthcare workers, it is dangerous for them to just do resuscitation. There was a woman on media today who said she had done 3 resuscitations and was all failed, and she thought she had really endangered her life and was taking that home to her family.
John, if just to follow on Sister Carol, I couldn't agree more that the decision about end of life and hard decisions that she described, Father Miles described, are ultimately, they should be, to the greatest extent possible, the decision of the patient in consultation with their family and the physician and the care community. What I want to focus on those, I want to distinguish between that and what we shouldn't be talking about, which is we shouldn't have those hard decisions exacerbated by a lack of resources available to hospitals. Now there may be crises that you can never entirely prepare for, but the problems that we're talking about now in terms of lack of resources in hospitals in the United States, even in New York, is a predictable result of a pandemic. And everybody knows the fact that there would eventually be a pandemic of this kind in the United States it's not a surprise. We've had pandemics before, we'll have them again. We prepared for them. There's a failure of planning here. And this gets to your question about resources. So on the one hand, if we had, for example, in this case, if we as a country had moved more rapidly as soon as this virus appeared, rather than downplaying it and not planning for it, we might have been able to generate resources earlier, even from Congress, to mobilize material. And even the material that we already have, and I'm talking about everything from ventilators to PPE and others, this gets to your question of subsidiarity. If this turns out to be a disease that has these hot spots of outbreaks, which seems to be the pattern, not only in China, not only here, but in China, we see this in Italy, that would argue for stepping up to a higher level of government, in this case, the national government, and try to shift resources as best you can to where the greatest need is, and be prepared to move it. And we have national stockpiles. We have a history of appropriating money for crises like this. I'm afraid that some element of what we're going to be facing and what healthcare providers are going to face is going to be predictable, but it's going to be the result of an avoidable lack of resources to the facilities they work in. And to me, that's a tragedy and a failure of public policy, and that's wrong.
We only have a few minutes, about 10 minutes left, and I want to ask two important questions that have come in, and I want to start with Reina. And one is, this is from Sophia Chen, who is a Georgetown student. As a resident of New York City, there's an immense fear from friends and family surrounding this crisis. In what measure can we use our Catholic faith to mediate fear and isolation? How can we remain hopeful in these difficult times? And then there is a question from Vietnam. Our reach is broad here. Let me find it. And that was a question from Saigon, Vietnam. Given the signs of the times, how might we continue a more robust interest in our social justice tradition and resurrect an understanding and experience of faith in the lives of Catholics? So 2 questions about faith. How do we develop a sense of hope in a time of fear? And how do we lift up the virtue of justice in a time of great injustice? Reina, you work with this, live with this on the local level in your own family, your own business. Hope and justice.
I went through many recessions studying in the war in El Salvador. And what I'm doing right now is that in the morning, I wake up and I watch Pope Francis Mass that is already in YouTube, which is one of the wonderful technology that we can appreciate nowadays. And keep my faith that this will be over soon if we all behave and take care of our family by distance ourselves. And what was the other question?
The question is, how do we cultivate a sense of justice when racial and economic injustice, when the treatment of immigrants makes all these challenges more difficult.
Yeah, the challenge is for our faith is not going to mass and just staying in your room, waking up in the morning and thinking that you cannot go. So just keep it to yourself and do the prayer in on. That's how I am adjusting, and just keep praying that people will keep their distance and not maintaining the crowd, including my family, that I keep telling them.
Well, and I mean, you're carrying out Catholic social teaching every day, and how you're treating your employees and how you're serving the community. John, Sister Carol, Father Miles, justice and hope. How do we hold those together in a time of really terrible time in so many ways? Justice and hope.
Well, I think justice begins with me. And I mean, Reina's example puts me to shame by how she's doing such wonderful things. So as Sister Carol said, you know, the basic justice of thanking the people who are keeping our lives going. The next level of justice about beginning to think about, you know, this is Lent and Easter's coming and we won't be able to celebrate it the way we want. But after this time of ordeal, there's going to come a time when we look at this resurrection. You know, the risen Christ is known by his wounds. They touch his wounds. When we think about this as we're coming on the other end, how can we think about how the body of Christ has been wounded by this virus? But also, how can we make sure that those who are the least among us, how can we do better in the future? Justice is not something that means recrimination. Justice means trying to treat people well. And treating people well is something that's going to be a task for the moment and for the future. And I mean, one of the things that I hope that's coming from this dying that we're experiencing coronavirus, I don't mean the actual number of deaths, although that's part of it, but the way in which our country is sort of locked in, is that we can open up with new excitement about caring for other people, and all this sort of nasty selfishness that we've heard so much about over the last couple of years. That when we experience this new time of rebirth, we remember what it's like, and that we don't keep on putting Christ on the cross by treating folks badly.
John?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. What I'd say, John, you know, when I think about justice and I think about social justice, it seems to me that if we as a society know there are steps that we can take to minimize the harm from an inevitable event like a pandemic, if there are things that we know we can do in terms of how do we create a safety net or a structure of opportunity that includes more people, brings more people to the table, gives everyone a seat, we know how to do that. These are not mysteries. That there are ways we through government, through private action, through our solidarity, we know that there are things we can do. So to me, that's a daunting, and you're right that this is a scary time. On the other hand, I keep thinking, well, this is the agenda. I mean, we don't have to look for an agenda. It's sitting there right in front of us. It's the injustices that that we see, and that if we can ameliorate, and if we can do anything that can minimize the suffering that results from injustice, we can overcome. That to me is hope and change.
Sister?
Well, I would certainly agree with everything that's been said. I would encourage everybody to continue to do the basics well, wash your hands, keep a social distance, but even more to find a way to help somebody else, to help somebody that's not as fortunate as we are, to help somebody that maybe is making a real contribution, whether it's doing the shopping for somebody that works in an essential business, whether it's healthcare or another essential service. That gets the focus off of us. When it comes to justice, I think as our country is mobilizing at a state and a national level and spending huge amounts of money, we have a real responsibility to make sure we are there with our voice and that money gets spent well. You just talked about the SNAP money. Now, anybody who's ever tried to live and feed a family on food stamps knows how challenging that is. To spend all this money for corporations and cut 15% increase in food stamps, you just have to say, what are we thinking? I read a quote this morning from the Italian Cardinal Archbishop of Genoa, who was the first person to close the churches and schools in Italy. And he talked about making decisions and, the people who felt they were brighter and smarter. And he looked up and he said, genius without heart is less effective. And I think we have a responsibility that when decisions are made, personal and collective, that they're not made without heart. And that's where Catholic social teaching will be so helpful.
Quick word, Father.
One thing just to help the healthcare providers who are there, to think now and talk to the person who's your healthcare proxy, a durable power of attorney, or download it from your local state boards, is to think about how you'd want to be treated if you get really sick from coronavirus. It's time, and it is something of justice, as well as to making sure that your wishes come forward, that you figure out what it is you want. I'm going to be 64 on April 18th. Here's what I want. If I get sick, I want to get to the hospital if I need oxygen. If I'm getting worse and there's a chance I'll get better, I'm willing to be intubated. If I'm not doing well after a few days, I want to see God, because the absolute value in my life is eternal life. That's maybe not everyone's, and I don't want to put that on them. But I think one of the things we can do with justice now is to help our family members or our other folks who choose with us to understand what our choices are, so that there's not this craziness in the intensive care unit. We can really relieve a lot of the suffering, the moral distress of the people who are trying to care for us by being responsible to have an advance directive now.
Well, on that good advice and happy note, I am really struck by the way in which Pope Francis epitomizes Catholic social teaching. But I recall that yesterday was the 25th anniversary of the Gospel of Life from John Paul II, which was an amazing call to defend the human life and dignity of all, every life, all life, with a special focus on the least of these, the poor and the vulnerable. And one of the most powerful images Pope Francis uses is the throwaway culture. And some people, when I talk about that, say that's an exaggeration, that's unreal. I think we're staring the throwaway culture in the face right now. And we would do worse than to follow the message of Catholic social teaching and the example of Pope Francis. I want to thank very much our panel, who have done such a terrific job in different ways. I want to thank Anna and Kim, who did so much work to make this possible. I especially want to thank Georgetown University's Global Health Initiative, who helped promote it and is working on these issues every day. And our friends Amy and Will, Optimum Audio, and AI Media that actually got us on, and we're seen by hundreds, perhaps 1,000 people. I want to also say that this will not be the last one of these we do. Georgetown is closed for all the reasons you understand, but we think this is the moment for the values of Catholic social teaching to be heard. So we will have another online dialogue, a focus on the economic and justice dimensions of this. Right now we're calling it Sharing the Burdens, Paying the Price, Economic and Moral Challenges of the Crisis. And we're looking at doing that the week of April 6th. So we want to thank you for participating, listening in. We want to thank you for your witness, for your faith, and especially for your hope at a time of fear. Thank you very much.